Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this edition of the Big East Rewind. I'm Chuck Everson, your host, and my co-host, as always, my point guard, Sonny Spera from Syracuse University. How are you, Sonny?
Chuck, doing great, man. Pretty excited about today.
Yeah, me too.
Can't wait.
You know, it's he came into college basketball. We're the same age. He came in same time, and we ran in the same circles a little bit. I know at least one circle. You know, you were involved with that. We're going to talk about that.
Another recruit I failed to land. Another one.
Well, three. He got three. So without any further ado, he played with Duke from 82 to 86. You know him as an ESPN color commentator and sports analyst. He's also the Kurt Gowdy Award winner from the National Basketball Association, from the National Basketball Hall of Fame, and a New York Times bestseller. My main man, Jay Bilas, is with us. Hi, Jay. How are you?
I am doing great. It's good to see you guys, and thanks for having me on the show.
Well, thanks for joining us. I mean, it's nice. Now we've got the third piece of that illustrious team that called that 6 overtime game. So I'm glad we had Raft on, we had Sean on, and now we've got you. So that works out pretty well,
You only heard one of us. You only heard Sean. Raft and I couldn't get a word in edgewise. We were just spectators.
That's right. So we were alluding to something. I'm going to go right into it, Sonny, if you don't mind. Is that okay with you? We alluded to the fact, Jay, that you and I have something in common. We both were hosted by one Sonny Spera at Syracuse, at our visits at Syracuse. It had to be right around the same time because we're the same group. And
I don't know, honestly, what that says about us as recruits, whether Boeheim really didn't give a rat's ass whether we came to Syracuse or not. But to me, it was a pretty clear message that you're not a valued recruit. So I took that message pretty seriously.
Well, we had Coach B on, and Coach B said that Sonny wasn't very good at his job, basically.
Actually, he was.
No, I'm taking a lot of heat here. Hold on a second, right? As you know, both you guys are the big guys, and you originally were with Sean. And Sean just doesn't have time for recruits. So what's he do? Well, my roommate, let's get Sonny do that. So that was my test. I remember Bernie talking about when you came in, Jay, you were like, he goes, this white kid's coming in from California. He won a dunk contest. And I was like, that's great. What positions does he
play? Yeah.
Well, Bernie Fine was amazed when they started recruiting me that a kid from Los Angeles would have any interest in Syracuse at all. Right. And so he and Boeheim used to call me whenever the weather was better in Syracuse than it was in LA, they would call me. And make a big deal out of, hey, the weather's nicer here. And Bernie used to say, hey, it snows here, but they clear the streets. They never close the airport. They clear the streets. And I was like, is that the best you can do for the weather? But I loved it there. And I would have Sonny and Sean Cairns and all the guys. That was the first time I'd met Leo Routens. And oddly enough, Leo and I wound up being teammates playing pro ball in Italy later on. Oh, wow. So I had and I have the distinction of being the first California kid that Jim Boeheim ever recruited. And he likes to say that after he found out he could get a kid from California, he went out there to recruit the good players.
That sounds like Coach. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So, okay. So let's talk about we started with recruiting, kidding around, but who else were you looking at, Jay? What other schools did you visit?
Well, I had, it's odd, Chuck. I had a tough experience with my high school coach. I think we all did. We had a great high school team, and we were all friends from third grade through high school. But our experience with our coach wasn't a good one. So my decision for college was less based upon the school I wanted to go to. That had almost nothing to do with it. It was who I wanted to play for. And I came down to 4 coaches in the final, sort of my final decision. It was Coach K at Duke, Jim Boeheim at Syracuse, Lute Olson at Iowa, and Ted Owens at Kansas. And the schools didn't seem to make any sense. They didn't have they didn't have a ton in common, all in different leagues and all that stuff, and all away from California. But it really came down to, I just liked Coach K the best. It wasn't that I didn't like the other guys, didn't like Coach Olson, who I remained close with until he passed. And I was knocked over by Jim. I absolutely loved him. The one thing I'm proudest of I think I made a good decision. But the one thing I'm proudest of is everybody I came down to were not only Hall of Fame coaches, but they all stayed at their schools for a million years. The only guy that left where he was at the time was Lute Olson, who went to Arizona and stayed there for a million years.
Right.
So the guys I chose had staying power. That's for sure.
Longevity. Yeah. Yeah. So what made you decide on Duke? Was it coach? Just strictly based on that?
It was all Coach K. And at that time, as you know, he didn't really have a track record of success. My first year there was his third year. Right. And so the team wasn't very good, and at least relative to how good it was going to be. And there was no basis for me to choose him on success rate, but there was just something about him. I trusted him. I liked him. I felt comfortable with him. And again, it wasn't that I didn't feel the same way about the others. It was just a question of degree. And so for me, it seemed like it was the right place to go. I will tell you that when I visited Syracuse is October, and so I was there. I played pickup with the team, which I probably wasn't legal, but did that. We played in Manly, and I stayed. My dad went with me, and so he stayed in the hotel room. I stayed with Bernie Fine at his place. And I remember getting up one morning to use the bathroom, and it might have been the coldest room I'd ever been in my life. And it was just October. And
no.
I don't know if I can handle this.
Wait. That's because Bernie kept his heat down to an Eskimo low. That's why. It wasn't that cold outside. Bernie just didn't heat his place because I stayed at his house too.
It was brutal. Yeah, I mean, Sonny, I had to go pretty bad, and I had to sit down, and I refused to. Big guys, and I'll hold it till I get to a warmer room. I am not sitting down in this place.
That's saying something right there,
So one thing I found interesting was I heard Coach K speak, and he talked about how he changed his recruiting tactics, how he went from recruiting a bunch of guys to recruiting very specific people, very intent, very one-on-one, handwritten letters, those kind of things. Were you part of that, Jay, when he was recruiting you?
Yeah, I didn't know it at the time, but since found out that his first year they had recruited like Chris Mullen and Jimmy Miller and all these different guys and didn't get any of them. And they had cast a pretty wide net apparently. And then the next year, which was my senior year in high school, they recruited a smaller group and kept it to that. And they wound up getting a couple of guys that wanted to commit at Johnny Dawkins' position, but they thought, you know what, they're really good and we should probably take them, but they're not as good as Dawkins. Let's hold out for Dawkins, that kind of thing. And they got everybody that they targeted. And, it's fortunate for me because if they had gotten me and then some of these other guys, I probably would have transferred somewhere because we would have lost. But the group we had, we wound up being the number one recruiting class in the country. And later on, the years 2, 3, and 4 lived up to it. Our freshman year was kind of a rough ride.
Yeah. Talk about that a second. I'm sorry, Sonny. Talk about that a second, Jay, from your first year, to the finals in '86, what kind of transformation you guys went through.
Well, we had the same team for 4 years. So the same group that we started as freshmen started as seniors, with one exception. That was Tommy Amaker came in my sophomore year. So we played 3 years together. And then it was the same group, the whole way. So it wasn't your typical experience of coming in, playing behind an older established player, and then sort of moving up. You didn't really move up. You just sort of stayed where you are. You just got better in that role. So you didn't, there weren't going to be any role changes. I didn't know that, but that's the way it was. And it was fantastic in a way that, we thought, we were ranked to start our freshman year because they, that recruiting ranking and all that stuff. And then realized that, wait a minute, man, these older guys are better. And so we had to get better quick. So when we started getting good, we had sort of the innocent climb of, we were nationally ranked our sophomore year in NCAA tournament, but I didn't realize this at the time, but my first NCAA tournament game was Coach K's first. He'd never been before. Sort of the first time we had ever done anything was the first time he'd ever done anything. First time winning an NCAA tournament game, first time winning, an ACC tournament title, the finals, all this stuff. He'd never done it before either. So we were kind of learning together, and it was a pretty neat experience when you think about it. And then on top of that, to have him stay for 40 years, I'm going to be 58 in December. and he's still coaching where I went to school. I mean, Sonny, it's pretty much, Syracuse guys and Duke guys that know that feeling, because there's nobody else in Division One that's been there that long. And that sort of continuity really benefits not only your relationship with the school, because my relationship with Duke is really good, but also your relationship with your teammates and those that played before and after you, because there's a central hub to that wheel, being Boeheim and Coach K. And it's pretty lucky when you really think about it. Very few players have had that sort of good fortune.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you two questions. The first one was, in your class, who was part of your class? You, Johnny Dog, was Mark Allery part of your class?
Mark Allery, David Henderson, a guy named Bill Jackman from Nebraska, and then a guy named Weldon Williams from Chicago. We were all ranked in the top 50 in the country, and wound up being the number one class. And one of them, Bill Jackman transferred back home to Nebraska. His father had passed away, and it was a rough year for him his first year, so he decided to bail. And we missed him, but everybody else stayed, and we wound up having a really good experience.
Yeah. So now the other question is, getting back to what your point was about Coach K and Coach B, just the longevity and the loyalty that they have for the school and the community. And I wasn't aware of it. Their friendship developed and just got strong. I think today they're the best of friends. Was that going on? Were you aware of that at the time? I was not. Were you aware that those guys were friends then, or did that just develop later?
I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know, Sonny, that they were friends when we were being recruited. I don't think they were. Later on, they became great friends, and I think that friendship went to a next level through USA Basketball. Mm-hmm. They're best friends, and which is great. Because that gives Boeheim one friend. It's fantastic.
It is nice when he had. I was at the game. I think I'm going to say it was probably Coach's 800th win, and he had a really nice. And you're right, he had a really nice montage from Coach K. There's 30,000 people going, "Oh, there he is."
He's a great target. Like I was just with him up in Boston at Sean McDonough's tournament. Just we laughed our asses off. But I always love to joke. Whenever I'm at an event, he's a target of mine. When I MC an event, saying, "Hey, I talked to Sonny Spera the other day and asked if he ever saw Coach Boeheim smile, and he said, well, it's hard to say. I only played for him for 4 years."
Yeah,
he's got a great sense of humor, though.
He is. He's really.
When you get to know him, he does, right?
He's both of them are like, Jim comes across a certain way, but he's a great guy. You guys know he's a great guy, and he's really funny. And then Coach K is even funnier, actually. You see him chirping an official or something like that, and people have
snarl.
People have a view of him, but he's ridiculously funny, and he's a great guy to hang out with. And he doesn't take himself, even though, both those guys are ridiculously big deals. I don't think they take themselves too seriously, which is kind of nice.
I agree. Yeah.
Talk about your relationship with Coach K a little bit, Jay. I mean, over the years, it evolved from player, then you were a coach with him on his staff. And now, I'm sure you look at him like the relationship that we all had with Coach Massimino went from being a coach-player relationship to being a friend, a mentor, somebody you talk to, that kind of thing. Talk about the how it changed and how it morphed into where it is today.
The change has been pretty interesting because he's always Coach K to me. I've never called him Mike, and I don't think I ever could.
Right.
He's like of the words used to describe the relationship, probably mentor would be first for me. Playing for him for 4 years, and then I played overseas for a few, and then came back as a grad assistant. Being on his staff was really enlightening. I probably learned more about the game on his staff than I've learned in all the other years combined. But it was a great education about basketball and what it really takes. So working for him was great. But being a broadcaster and then seeing him all the time where I have to cover the team has been interesting too, because he doesn't always like what I say. I mean, there have been times when he's been unhappy with me over something, whether it's a Grayson Allen situation or you name it. I mean, he doesn't always agree with me, but he's always been, the one thing he's always been with me is honest. And he gave me some great advice when I started in broadcasting. I started on the radio, and he said, don't ever pull any punches when it comes to Duke. Like, if you see something, say it. And maybe later on he didn't like that advice, but he said nobody will ever take nobody will ever take you seriously if they perceive you as a homer. Like don't pull punches, and that was really freeing advice. I don't know that I would have anyway. My legal training was helpful to me in that, no matter what. But it was a nice thing for him to have said to sort of help me out that way.
At what point did you go to law school? I remember hearing you speak, and I'm trying to put it in the frame of what you're talking about. You came back from Europe, and then you joined the staff. Was it during that graduate assistant that you enrolled in law school at Duke? Yeah,
Sonny, it was the exact same time. So what had happened, I was playing overseas in Italy, and which was my level. I mean, I got drafted and went to camp with the Dallas Mavericks, but if I made the team, I would have been getting Gatorade for Mark Aguirre. That would have been my whole job. So, it was kind of nice to go over to Italy and be a star caliber player there. But I thought I'd play 10, 12 years over there, and that would be my career as a player. But after my third year, Coach K called me. I had applied to Duke Law School because I wanted to get admitted somewhere and then defer it and go after I finished playing, that I didn't have to take all those tests and prepare and all that when I was 30 some years old. So Coach K knew that. And so he had a spot on his staff. So he called me and asked me, do you want to take this? And if you get admitted to law school, will you go? Because they're not interested in you deferring it. And so he had it all set up, basically. Like, he knew what he wanted if I wanted to do it. And so he facilitated it for me. And it was one of those things where I felt like, I need to take this, that I've enjoyed playing, but I could see the end down the road, that this is whether it was 10 years, 12 years, whatever. At the end of it, I'd have a big pile of money, but I'm not sure I would have had any direction or anything to do. And so he was, and that's one of the great things about him is he thinks globally about what's best for you. And so he didn't tell me what to do or tell me I should do this, but he made it pretty clear that this is a pretty good option for you. You need to consider this. And so, and he got some pushback, frankly, when I accepted it and then I took the law school thing. The law school pushed back on me working and being in school at the same time. And he's the one that told him, hey, look, if he screws this up, fine. But you can't tell him, you shouldn't be telling him not to do it. It's a good thing he's trying to do this, not a bad one. And so he greased the skids for that and made it possible for me to do that.
I had a similar thing in dental school. I had the same exact scenario. I was going to be a graduate assistant coach, and they said, you can't have that job. And I had a professor go to bat for me. So were you at that point, were you thinking, okay, I'm going to get my law degree, but I'm going to be in coaching? Where was the balance? Like, what was your long-term goal at that point?
I didn't really want to be a lawyer when I went to law school. I went to law school for the education and to sort of have it in my back pocket. I thought it would, my dad told me it's the most versatile degree you can have. A lot of people have law degrees and don't practice law and do other things. And it's he thought it would be a great way of learning a different way of thinking and all that stuff. Neither one of my parents had the opportunity to go to college, so he was pretty pro preparation with education. So, but after, so I thought I'd stay in coaching, but my wife and I got engaged and we spent a lot of time talking about it. It didn't seem like it was the right thing for our family situation. It might've been the right thing for me, but it wasn't the right thing for us. And so I said, hey, look, I can practice law. It's no problem. So I took a job as a lawyer in Charlotte with a big law firm, Charlotte, North Carolina. And not long after that, I've been practicing for a few months, and I got a call from a guy named George Habel, who was who ran the Capital Sports Network. And he asked me if I'd do radio for his network. And I thought, it'd get me out of the office a couple times a week. It'd be fun. And I took it. And I figured if I screw it up, I'll do, if it affects my law practice, I'll quit. But I'm not going to quit before I start. So I took the gig. I made probably $250 a game or something like that. And And somehow it led to some work with ESPN, and that led to more work. And then I had to choose between law and broadcasting because I couldn't do both anymore. I was doing too many games.
So take us through that transition then, Jay. How did it work going from coaching and where you were, like you said, into the broadcasting part of it?
Well, I had always had an interest in broadcasting. In high school, I thought, you get interviewed and stuff like that, and newspaper articles for, your local high school, and everybody would say, what do you want to do after basketball? And I didn't really have a good answer. So I kind of thought, well, Frank Gifford is doing Monday Night Football and Don Drysdale is doing baseball and all this stuff. So I thought, well, maybe I'll get into broadcasting. And that back then, as you guys know, the schools that recruited you could help you with stuff like that. So through Coach K, I started working in the summertime for ABC Sports. There was a Duke alum named Chuck Howard that ran. He's one of the top producers in the country, and he got me work during the summer, working at the Olympics and Monday Night Baseball. I did pro bowling. I did all these different events, and sort of prepared myself. I didn't commentate them, but I worked behind the scenes and wound up meeting a lot of people that someday I would work with. So I prepared myself to get into broadcasting, but I never thought it would happen. I didn't know how it would happen. But I had fully anticipated when I said no to the coaching thing, that path. I had fully anticipated I was going to practice law the rest of my life, and had worked toward it. I practiced full time for 7 or 8 years, and then when the ESPN thing, a full time gig at ESPN was I needed to choose. I mean, I took it, but I stayed with my law firm. They asked me to stay. I don't practice anymore, but I've been 29 years with the same law firm. I just help with recruiting and the occasional piece of business that comes in. But it's been a great, sort of a great association for me with my law firm. And obviously the broadcast work has been nothing but fun. It's a lot of work and a lot of travel, but I don't feel like it's work. I mean, I really enjoy the amount of time I put into it. There's never a time when I've gone, oh my God, I got to go to work. I don't think that way. I really love the stuff.
Well, Jay, just, what school has a really good broadcast journalism school? Do you know?
That was a big selling point.
Do you know? I mean, so I'm going to put this one on Coach Boeheim because he had the perfect school for you, as well as a good opportunity. So it wasn't me, my failure. It was Coach Boeheim's failure. So
well, I tell people, Sonny, the decision between Coach K and Coach Boeheim came down to I was going to go with the better looking coach.
There you go. Well, every broadcaster except you that has been on the show, Jay, has been a graduate of Sonny's Syracuse University. So
it's not an accident.
Just saying, from Len Berman to everybody else that we've had on, it's just been it's been like a march right through Syracuse into the broadcasting field. So
I'm surprised, Chuck, I even got in the business without the springboard of the Newhouse School.
There you go.
Yeah, but you had connections and you did it when you were undergrad. You were smart. You were thinking, 10 years ahead, which is, unfortunately something that doesn't often happen with undergrads,
it's nice to say, but I was probably lucky, Sonny. I mean, I'm a big believer, I hear people like Oprah and all that say, there's no such thing as luck. It's preparation, meeting opportunity and all that stuff. But I don't buy that for 1 second. I think luck is a big factor in the success of an awful lot of people. And it's certainly been a big factor with me. I mean, the people that I met and the decisions that I made, I'm very grateful for and happy with. But there was a big degree of luck to all this.
I got to ask you a couple of questions now. When you went to the ACC, that was sort of when the Big East was up and coming. How was that? How did you view that from, let's say, outside the circle, but yet being so close to being literally a Big East player? What was the thoughts on the Big East from your angle?
Everything I knew about the ACC and the Big East came from television. I had no idea where Duke was. I knew it was in the state of North Carolina, but I didn't know where. I didn't know its proximity to UNC or NC State or Wake Forest. I had no clue about any of that stuff. And everything I knew about Syracuse came from watching TV and seeing the orange on television and reading all these magazines and books and all that stuff. So, my experience in basketball was mostly West Coast. I mean, there weren't as many national events back then in high school. So I didn't go to 5-star. I didn't want to have my dad pay for me to go all the way out there. I went to the California equivalent of that, or the West Coast equivalent, Superstar Camp. I went to that a couple times, the only invitation-only camp on the West Coast. So I didn't know. I mean, I knew all these players by reputation, but I didn't even know what most of them looked like. It was all TV. So it wasn't a decision between the ACC and the Big East as much as it was between this coach and that coach. So, I mean, it turned out, my decision came down to the schools were one in the ACC, one in the Big East, one in the Big Ten, and one in the Big Eight. And, nobody no coaches in California or the West Coast made the cut of the Final Four for me. So, I would have loved to have stayed West, frankly. I still miss California just about every day. I was just out there over the weekend, and it's really hard to beat. But I'm glad I made the decision, because basketball mattered more in the ACC and the Big East than it did back then. It was the Pac-10. It mattered more, and not that it didn't matter at UCLA or USC, but it mattered more at Syracuse. It mattered more at Duke and North Carolina, all these places, and that was important.
What was tell me some stories of your first experiences broadcasting, and you can put McDonough in there. You don't have to, but just feel free to talk about it.
Well, my first experience broadcasting was as a radio commentator. So I did radio games and did all the Duke basketball games with Bob Harris, who was a legendary broadcaster, just retired 3-4 years ago. So I did that, and I knew the Duke team very well because I just coached there. So most of my work was learning about and scouting Duke's opponents, and I didn't have the ability to go to Duke's practices because I was working. I would drive up to the game, a home game. I would drive up, and I'd get there 20 minutes before tip sometimes, and so I'd have to do the homework of scouting the other team and being on the phone and learning as much as I could. And the only criticism I got early on was, how it is, like the Duke broadcasts, there were Duke fans listening, and they wanted to hear more about their team than the opponent. They weren't that interested in the opponent. They wanted to hear more about their team. And even if it was over and over again, they didn't, they wanted to hear the same stuff. So that was it, because the other team was more interesting to me, learning about them. But then my first game with ESPN was in 1995. Charleston Southern versus UNC Greensboro, the Big South championship game. And I treated that game like it was the Super Bowl. I spent a lot of time on it, and that was really a blueprint for how I did games the rest of the way. It might not have been highly rated, but it was important to me, and it was important to the people who were watching it. So, but I worked with so many great, I've worked with Brent Musburger and Mike Tirico. Dick Enberg was a partner of mine for a long time, and Sean McDonough, Dan Schulman, you name it. So I've had no shortage of great play-by-play people that have made me look a lot better.
How about when the dream team came together with you, Sean McDonough, and Raph?
The first time that happened, that happened during a Big East game. We were doing Big Monday, and it was an odd feeling for me. I knew both of them, but didn't know them all that well. And so our bosses at ESPN decided, well, let's drop Bilas into this and make it a 3-man booth. And it was like being dropped into a 30-year marriage or something. Like, what am I doing here? And I was reticent about it. I didn't want to get in their way. Obviously a big fan of both of them, but both personally and professionally. But I felt uncomfortable that, I shouldn't be here. So the first game, we had a game at Notre Dame, and Notre Dame had a transfer named Danny Miller, came in from Maryland. And Danny Miller had done something spectacular, and showing a replay, Raftery says, "It's Miller time, and you know how I love hearing that." And without missing a beat, McDonough says, "Except on Big Monday, brought to you by Bud Light." And I lost my shit laughing. I could not stop laughing.
Right to the extent he has to, but get the puppy said, "It's Miller time." And you know how I love to hear that.
Except when it's Big Monday, presented by Bud Light. And Judgment Week, presented by Cisco Systems. Connecticut and Notre Dame at the sold-out joint.
All we did was laugh the whole time. And I thought, they're going to pay me to do this. And, so we would go out. Our routine was on a big Monday, we would go out to lunch, go to the team's practice on Monday, shoot arounds and all that. And then we would go to the game, then go out after, usually with the coaches, and then hightail it out of town the next day. And Raftery was usually coming in from a CBS game he had on Saturday or Sunday. So one time we're in Philly doing a Villanova game, and we meet for lunch, and Sean McDonough gets there last. And so he sits down, says hello, and then he says to Bill, he says, how was the game this weekend? How's Vern? Vern Lundquist. And Raftery says, oh, Sean, we had a great time. We went out to dinner. We opened bottles of wine. We talked about the business, and we talked about all the great broadcasters. Your name didn't come up. Even Sean was floored by that one. The timing was impact, but that was sort of we just looked for every opportunity to bust each other's chops. And then when the game got good, there's nobody better in broadcasting at the big moment than Sean, and there's nobody better at having fun and saying the right thing at the right time than Raft. And I was just along for the ride. It was just a great group to be a part of.
So we're going to go right into that big game at the Garden, that 6 overtime game with those guys. What was that like? I mean, that was an endurance thing, not only for the players and the referees and the coaches, but for you guys as well, right?
Yeah, but we didn't know it. So as the game was going on, Syracuse UConn, it was a good game, but I don't know that if Devendorf shot at the buzzer, if it had been counted, that we would have been talking about the game as a great game. It's just a really, it was a solid, Big East tournament game, pretty good, but not sort of historic. But, we knew we had something special after a couple overtimes. And so it never occurred to me until the game was over that, my God, usually I'd have to use the can at some point, but it didn't happen. But that was still the longest the Garden has ever been open. It was the latest the Garden had ever been open for business. I think it still is. I mean, it's 2:00 in the morning when we got out of there.
Wow.
But there were two really funny things from that. One's not so funny. I mean, McDonough, the proudest moment that Raft and I have from that game is that with all the buzzer beating calls and the overtime things and the clock situations, we never stepped on McDonough. He got to call a clean game, and we stayed out of his way. And boy, am I glad we did, because he had one of the all-time great calls. And still in my ear, I can hear overtime number 6. And, getting all these messages about, oh, my God, what a great game. And, it seemed like the whole world was watching as the overtimes piled up. But then after the game was over, it was typical of that, of Syracuse, that, we were talking about them being on the bubble and are they going to make the tournament and all that stuff. So in the old Garden, before they redid it, we had gone underneath behind our broadcast position to get, box scores and game notes for the next day. And when we came back out, the Garden was completely empty. There was nobody. And Boeheim comes out behind the scorers table across from us. And so it's just me, Raph McDonough, and then across the court is Boeheim. And he looks at us and he goes, are we in the tournament now? And we lost it. I mean, it was so good. Typical Boeheim, it's just not, hey, well, how about that game? It's like, hey, you dipshits, are we in the tournament now? All you talk about. It was so great.
Well, I tell you what, I'm impressed so far with all your impressions, Jay. I got to tell you, I mean, you're like the Rich Little of broadcasting. You got everybody down cold. That's great. Yeah, that's great. So, give us a couple of good stories of some stuff that's happened behind the scenes that people wouldn't ordinarily know. With a coach or a player that said something to you. What kind of stories do you have about some of the coaches because you've had some real characters, you've named a few already, but I mean, you've had some real characters that you did games for, I'm sure.
Yeah, so many. I mean, the best part, Chuck, is all the coaches are so good to me. I mean, they let me into practice, scouting reports, coaches meetings, you name it. And, so I've had so many fortunate days with, Jay Wright or Tom Izzo or you name it. And just being able to see how they work day to day and what good guys they are. Like Jay Wright, I got to know him when he was at Hofstra. And I was talking to Mike Bray, who was at Delaware at the time. Now he's at Notre Dame. But when he was at Delaware, I called him up and I said, all right, what's going on in your league that I need to know? And he said, have you seen Hofstra? And I said, yeah, I've seen him. I saw him once. I mean, that kid Claxton's a good player and Richardson, they're good players. And he said, watch the coach. And he told me Jay Wright is the real deal. Like, that guy is the real thing. So I started watching more, and they had a tournament game. They played in Greensboro in the NCAA tournament. And I didn't have a game that day, so I went to the game just to watch Hofstra, and sought him out after the game. They got beat. I can't remember who beat him, UCLA or something like that. But I went back to see him and introduce myself. I mean, I'd met him before, but I didn't really know him. And ever since then, he was somebody I went to constantly, because I just respected who he is and the way he does his business. And, look, he's changed because he's gotten better, but he's not changed fundamentally who he is. And that's one of the things I've respected most about Jay and liked most about him. But we've spent a lot of nights, we'd go out. One thing Jay can never do is say no to raftering. So win, lose, whatever, he used to come out with us. And in today's day and age, coaches don't do that much anymore. But he'd come out to dinner with us. They'd lose or something, and he would never be down in the dumps about it. I know he was upset about losing, but just all the great times you had with him and his people. That's really the fun stuff, is the time off the court you get with these guys. One of the things, Chuck, I'll tell you this one. So I did Dick Enberg's last college basketball game. It was at Syracuse in the NCAA tournament. Wow. West Virginia and Kentucky played. It was 2010. They played in the regional final in the Carrier Dome. And Dick was the consummate pro. And after the game, he packed his stuff up and did not want any fanfare. So I had said to him, hey, we're going out tonight. And so Syracuse, I think, had lost that day, so they had flown back in. So PJ Carlissimo, Jim Boeheim, Rolly Massimino, and I and Enberg all went out. And so we went to some Italian joint that Boeheim likes in Syracuse. Mm-hmm. And the guys were telling stories, and I just sat there. And Enberg loved every second of it. Rolly had food all over him. He's talking while he's eating. Food's flying out of his mouth, and I don't think PJ said more than 3 words that didn't start with F, and it was magnificent. And Boeheim was great, and they were so good to Enberg, and I don't think I'll ever forget how good they were to him, because I mean he was a legend, and I miss him every day. But for them to do that for him, I thought that shows you what great guys they all are.
Yeah, very much so. During that time frame too, especially in the Big East, you had all of these great coaches, from Thompson and Boeheim and all the rest that you'd mentioned, Coach Mass and PJ. I mean, those guys were like rock stars. We talked about it a little bit on some of the other broadcasts we've done, Jay, but those guys were like, they were more famous and more popular than some of the better players in the league at that time.
And they were characters. They weren't corporate at that time. They weren't making the kind of money guys are making now. So when they got a shoe deal, that was a lot of money relative to what they were making from their schools. But the coaching was a grittier profession back then. And it may be just as competitive now, but it's not more competitive. And some of those guys, I mean, I think they all respected one another, but at the time, some of them didn't like each other. Yeah. And that was actually added to it. I mean, it made it more fun. And to me, look, when I played in the ACC, I mean, I think there was a perception that the ACC was the best league, and that was the ACC tournament was the granddaddy mall, was the best tournament. When I started broadcasting and really, really doing Big East games, there wasn't anything better than a Monday night in the Big East. And there wasn't anything better than the Big East tournament in the time I was doing it at the Garden. Like Saturday night at the Garden was, and this from the semifinals on Friday. Epic is the right word. I mean, it was like, I used to call them anthem games. Like, man, I get to do an anthem game. When the national anthem is shown as part of the broadcast, it's a big game, and they showed the anthem at that game at the Big East final, so you knew you were in for it. And there was, so when that Big East, I mean, I know there still is a Big East, but it's not the same. It's still great, but it's not the same. When the old Big East went away, we lost something that we'll never get back. There'll never be anything like that again. It was unique and unique in a great way.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah, I agree.
So now take us into your work. I mean, talk about your work with the V Foundation. I know you're big with those guys, and I was there in the building when Jimmy V gave his speech, which was incredible. That I was lucky enough to be there to see that in person. Talk about your work with those guys and what they're doing to help people.
Well, that's nice of you to bring up. I mean, I'm on the board of the V Foundation. I'm a new board member, so I've been on it for a year and a half. So I'm still getting my feet wet. But the commitment that those that started the V Foundation have shown through the years. I mean, the amount of money that's been raised is one thing; it's a ridiculous amount. But the people that have been helped, the research gains that have been made. Someone mentioned at a meeting recently that I can't remember exactly what it was, but pediatric cancer, the survival rate was 20% 30 years ago, and now it's up near 70%, whatever the percentage is. But I mean, you're going, stuff's mind-boggling, the gains that have been made, and certain cancers, like Dick Vitale was recently diagnosed with lymphoma. And it's the second bout with cancer. He had some melanoma issues about a year ago, but early on they thought it was much worse. And luckily it was just lymphoma, which is severe. But the cure rate is 90%. And that if this happened 20, 30 years ago, we wouldn't be saying that. We wouldn't be saying, hey, how fortunate it is that it's lymphoma. He's 82 years old. It is going to be, going through the chemo is not going to be any picnic, but just the fact that he's got this kind of support from the medical community, and they can do so much. And we're, not to mix sports metaphors, but we're so much closer to the goal line in cancer research than we've ever been. It's really energizing. And this last year at the V Foundation Wine Celebration, which is our biggest fundraiser, there were some doctors there that were talking about a vaccine for cancer, which I had never heard before. And, other people said, oh, yeah, that's been talking. I never heard that. So it's really kind of amazing what everybody's doing on the front lines, and whatever we can do to provide them the resources they need. I mean, we'll do.
A couple of questions I want to ask you, Jay, because you have been a vocal advocate for the NCAA and for the athletes.
Yeah.
Where are things now, especially with the NIL component out there now? Where do you feel about some of the things that are going on now in the athletic arena and the athletic boardrooms, really?
Sonny, overall, I feel really good about the way things are going. Some of the old school, old timers are not happy with it because there's change. But here's the way I would look at it. When the three of us were in school, the last time the NCAA was before the Supreme Court, it was 1984. And back then, schools, the NCAA used to tell schools how often they could be on television. And the schools didn't like it. And they sued the NCAA under the same theory the players recently sued, which was antitrust. That the NCAA is a cartel. They can't tell market competitors what to do. Right. And the schools won. Yeah. So there, while we were in school, it was the start of radical change. And it was radical change on the revenue side. So salaries went way up, revenues went way up. We were going from a business that made hundreds of millions of dollars to the business that makes $15 million a year. And so now, when we were in school, I was named to an NCAA committee. I was an athlete representative on the NCAA Long Range Planning Committee. So I got behind the curtain and saw how policy was made, and I didn't like it. And I brought things up about things I didn't like and got shot down every time in a nice way. The people were great, but they shot down my thoughts every time. And I was saying, wait a minute, there's no reason why we shouldn't be allowed. Like, if we accept a sandwich, we're a criminal. That's wrong. And we should be allowed to transfer. Like, that's not fair.
Exactly.
So I believed all this stuff back then, but I didn't voice it because I was a team member on these NCAA committees, and I felt like I should march in lockstep with everyone when a decision was made. I could be vocal about the decision beforehand. Once a decision was made, I needed to be supportive. But once I became a broadcaster, I didn't feel like that was my role anymore. So I spoke out, and I don't know what impact it had, but what I can tell you is the players being allowed to do commercials now is not going to make the world spin off its axis. And clearly it's not going to make people stop watching, because the ratings are higher for football right now than they've ever been.
Yeah, they're off the charts. Yeah.
They're off the charts. And I think the biggest concern that the schools have, and athletic directors and coaches, is that, money is going to be a factor in recruiting. Well, it always has been on facilities. And yeah, it always has been. But now the money's, maybe money's going to start going directly to the players. And what that shows, and the concern people have over it, shows that the players are the most valuable commodity in the game. And the thing that impacts winning and losing more than anything is the players.
Right.
And so, I think money should go to them. But if a school, whether it's Syracuse, Villanova, Duke, you name one, those are our three. But if they don't want to pay, don't pay. Just like if they don't want to pay their coaches millions, pay them less and see how you do in the marketplace. I think we're headed to a time, not the not so distant future, where unless Congress acts to prohibit it, you're going to see schools offering contracts to players, because that's going to be the easiest and most cost efficient way to do business. That's where we're headed. And that's going to be better for college sports than what we've had, in my view, and I think in the view of most economists. But the only hope that the NCAA has of sort of the system that they had in place, maintaining some semblance of looking the same, is going to be Congress is going to have to give them an antitrust exemption and limit what can be given to athletes. And I'm not sure Congress is going to do that. I don't see it, but maybe they will.
Well, we haven't even touched on the Ed O'Bannon Supreme Court ruling thing, right? That's not even part of the NIL thing. So that's
it's part of it in that it helped lead to it. So the O'Bannon ruling was very positive for the players, but it didn't open the floodgates. The Alston case is what really took down sort of amateurism within the NCAA structure, and it did so because the NCAA, not to bore you with the legal side of this, but Alston was really only about academic benefits. So can schools give academic awards and pay for graduate school and paid internships, and can they give players laptops and the like? That's all the NCAA lost in the Alston case, and they appealed it to the U.S. Supreme Court. And this is not a legal term, but they got their ass handed to them 9-0. And so it took away every protection they had from that 1984 case we were talking about. And it also was an invitation, because of the ass kicking they took, for players to bring other lawsuits that will ultimately reach that level. And I think it's pretty clear the NCAA is going to lose those. So that's why NIL is happening, is because the NCAA basically got eviscerated at the Supreme Court level. And now they're deregulating everything. They're having a constitutional convention to take themselves out of certain things and give authority back to the conferences and the teams to make their own decisions with regard to how they're going to compensate their athletes. That's where we're headed ultimately.
Now, I've heard you talk about it, and I think one of the things you talked about was the NCAA having a commissioner, was it?
Yeah.
So I'm nominating you because I think you're the perfect guy for it.
I'd probably have to take a pay cut for it, but the NCAA would never let me get near the business. They would never allow that, because I would say, hey, look, the NCAA has said from its formation that athletes are students to be treated like any other student. And if that's true, athletes are not treated like any other student. They're denied the same economic rights as every other student is allowed. And you guys probably know this, but more non-athletes get scholarships than athletes, and they're not told what they can earn or accept in the marketplace. And I think the NCAA ought to rethink this thing about saying, well, they're students, they're not employees. There are a number of regular students that are employed by their university in some capacity. And there's no prohibition anywhere that students can't be employees. Of course they can. We built this business into a multi-billion-dollar industry, and we did it with our eyes open. And we can't complain now that we're running, somehow that we're running the Little League World Series. And how can these players expect, more than a scholarship? That's an absurd notion. I get it that some fans aren't used to this, but they're not worried about it. They don't care. They care about the product on the field, and they want their games. They don't care whether, Zion Williamson has a shoe deal or whether, a women's volleyball player is doing Instagram ads. They don't care. And the NCAA is going to learn that pretty quickly, and all their legal arguments are going to be out the window.
Do you think, Jay, as we go forward with this, that more and more players will stay in school for a longer period of time?
I do think that's going to be an effect of it, that if players are making money, I don't think it'll affect, the real big shots. Like Zion Williamson is probably not going to stay an extra year in school, but I think I don't even know the right way to put it, the second tier players that might be a second round pick or something like that might say, you know what, I'm making pretty good money here. I can take my time. I can be fully prepared when I go. Because as you guys know better than I do, there are a number of players that leave early that probably shouldn't, just for basketball reasons. I don't have any problem with, players should do whatever they want. If they're ready to be pros, whatever, if they feel they're ready, if they want to, go ahead and go.
Go be
but
pro.
If we're just, but if we're just strictly looking at what the best thing for them is from a basketball context, a lot of times it's hey, be more mature, better prepared, all that stuff. Being older is usually better. But I think it will, Chuck, allow people to stay a little bit longer. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, if we really believe in education, and I think we do, staying in school longer is a good thing. It's not a bad thing.
Yeah, I agree with you. 100%. So last one, Jay, and we'll let you go. We're running up against it a little bit. Coach K's last season. This is his last go around. I know that there was a scrimmage yesterday or the day before where Jay and Coach K got together, and we had a little game, a little workout. Didn't hear much back from it because we never do, but I'm sure it was very competitive. I know Duke is the players at Duke love that guy so much. They're not going to let him go out on a bad note, I'm sure. What are your thoughts on his final season, and has he spoke to you about it? And what are your thoughts on Coach K's final season coaching? Because arguably he's on the Mount Rushmore of college basketball coaches. I think we can all agree on that.
I think he is on the Mount Rushmore. I think it's going to be the hardest act to follow in the history of college sports, maybe sports period, because he's done it for 40 plus years at one place, and he's done it all on television. John Wooden, Bear Bryant, all his coaches, they were ultra successful, but they didn't do it on TV like Coach K has. Yep. So he's synonymous with and irreplaceable as an icon, but he's going to be replaced as a head coach next year. So it's a little bit of an odd feeling to have a farewell tour, victory lap, whatever you want to call it. But I'm really grateful that we kind of get to savor it a little bit. So it'll be a balancing act. I mean, I think there's a chance that some people could get tired of listening to us chronicle it. Because we're going to talk about it every game and chronicle the whole thing. So some people may say, I get it. We know he's retiring. We know how good he is. Let's see the game. I get that. That's going to happen. Yeah. So we're going to have to balance, this year and this team with the historical context of this coach. And so hopefully we'll balance it in a good way. Obviously ESPN's not the only ones doing this. But for me personally, I've had such a history with Coach K. Hopefully I won't be saying, hey, this is the last time he's going to, coach at at the Dean Dome, or last time he's going to coach here. We'll probably mention it, but hopefully not be too tearful about it and just get on with the game. And I know he wants to get on with it. He wants to have a great team and a great year. But I think more so than for him, he wants to have it for this team and for these players. Like it may be like Paolo Banchero, his most talented player. This is Coach K's 42nd year or whatever at Duke. It's this kid's first. And so he wants that to be a good year for this kid more so than for him, I think.
Yeah, he keeps everything close to the vest. He's a very private guy. What do you think about them naming his successor already, You think that was a good thing? I know Coach Hans pretty much helped select the guy. Do you think that's a good thing for this, which could turn into a circus? You've seen everybody's last year from Michael Jordan and on and on. Kareem comes to mind. They had a big farewell thing, and Dr. J. You could see that happening here, and I know that's the last thing that Coach wants. So do you think that this will help that, or do you think that might hinder it?
I think it'll help it. First of all, John Shire, the next head coach at Duke, is not only a great guy, he's a great young coach. He'll do really well. It was the right decision. But he's gotten off to an unbelievable start in recruiting. He's got a number 1 or number 2 rated recruiting class already. So that really helped, I think, having everything solidified so everybody knows where they stand. And so I think it's going to be really important. It'll be a good year for John to get prepared for next year. So this won't be a surprise to anyone. We all know it's coming. I agree with you that the media could make it into a circus, but I don't think Duke will. I think they'll be very circumspect with how they approach it and how they handle it and put the players first. But you can't help but the tickets are going to go for a crazy amount of money. And at the V Foundation wine celebration, 4 tickets to the Duke Carolina game, Coach K's last game in Cameron, went for $1 million.
Wow.
And it's going to be, so I have 1 seat that I'm going to be sitting in. If somebody wants to sit in my lap, I'll take $500,000. I'd be more than happy to have you along.
Well, it depends, Jay. You wouldn't want me sitting on your lap. That's it. I know that. Or your boy, Mark Blansky. Neither one of us, we're too big for that.
Yeah, for $500K, I'll and how about that? So Spera couldn't land me at Duke, and I couldn't land, or he couldn't land me at Syracuse, and I couldn't land Plansky. I hosted Plansky on his visit, and he immediately went to Villanova.
The 6 separation of Sonny Spera. That's how it works out. So Jay,
I put my request in. I'm trying to go to the Syracuse Duke game on the 22nd of January. I called just today and Saturday, and they said, good thing you called because Coach Boeheim just took it back over. Requests are coming out of the woodwork. So I may or may not make it.
If you run into any problem, call me because I've got a couple tickets I can help you out.
There you go. Thank you. There you go. Well, thanks a lot for joining us today. Our guest has been Jay Bilas. We had a great time talking to you. Always good to see you, my friend. I appreciate you coming out and joining us. Thank you very much for your time.
Great to be with you guys. Always good friends and really enjoy you. Thank you for having me.
Good Absolutely. To get back together. Thanks, brother.
See you, You've buddy. Been listening to the Big East Rewind with Sonny Spera and Chuck Everson. The Big East Rewind is produced and directed by Nick Chico Chorus and Daryl Gurney. You can reach out for us on Gmail if you want to get a hold of us at bigeastrewind@gmail.com. Also, where all of our episodes are on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast from. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. All right. Thank you very much for joining us. Everybody have a great night. Thanks for joining us.